Oh, that's for the water yard, isn't it?
Morena.
Yeah.
Kora koutou katoa,
Yep,
councillors,
the,
ngā kaimahi katoa, tēnā koutou. Welcome to this workshop by the Regional Council Biodiversity Strategy and Scoping Workshop. So just to open our meeting, I'll do a karakia that we regularly use. Tui a kei rongo, tui a kei raro, tui a ki waho, tui a ki roto, tui te here tangata karongo te pō, karongo te ao, haumi e hui e ai e. So, looking forward to working through your work, mahi there, Shay.
Thank you. Kia raki nui, kia papatuanuku, tēnā korua, kia tāne a takaroa, a tāwharima, tēnā koutou, ki ka upoko o taukai, tēnā koe. Kai kanuhira, a rohi o tākou, tēnā koutou. Kai mahi mo kai kanuhira, a rohi o tākou, tēnā koutou. Nā te poti hau, ko Shavan de Hook, whakunga, he kai tahutahu matua rautaki ahau, si kanuhira a rohi o tākou. Rautaki mo te taiho, te kaupapa tēnei hui. I'm Shay from the strategy team, kia ora. I'm here with Scott Jarvie from the science team and Libby Coble from the environmental implementation team. Thanks for joining me today too. And yeah, we're here to discuss the biodiversity strategy, so thanks for the introduction. Yeah, the purpose of the workshop today is twofold. To provide you all with the context of the biodiversity strategy, which has been planned in this year's long-term plan for ready for public consultation by the end of June, and socialise how we plan to respond and the kinds of thinking it will take. I have made a couple of small alterations to the slide deck, so I apologise for that, but it was in the service of the flow of the workshop, so hopefully that helps out, and I may have added a couple of nice pictures. So this is the agenda for the day. I will very much stick to this, and I have time myself, so I can let you know that I should be able to get through it in that time. So biodiversity in Otago. So what are we talking about when we say biodiversity? We're talking about the variety of plants, animals, and creatures that are found in our environment, and that variety in Otago is huge. From the cheeky kia of the Southern Alps to the endangered skinks, mokomoko of Central Otago, from the weta on the rock and pillars that must have antifreeze for blood, to the yellow penguins on the coast. I hope you're back to winter. From the galaxids that have sought refuge from the glaciers or from being gulped, to the threatened plants making a living in some of the most tricky environments, to the korora, little blue penguin, so symbolic of the Waitaki. From the sea lion, whakahau, to the sea sponges on the sea floor. Biodiversity is the way that every species, no matter how big or small, has an important part to play in supporting the ecosystems in which they live. These species rely on each other and their unique environment to survive. It's all connected, even to us. Hina hoka, ka tahitaka ahau mo te taio. We live as one with our natural world. Take a look around. On your way to the council chambers this morning, you are surrounded by biodiversity. It's everywhere, from the remote mountain tops to our gullies and plains and lakes and rivers, to the bottoms of our oceans and everywhere in between. The RMA sums that up, probably a little bit less colourfully than me. Biological diversity means the variability among living organisms and the ecological complexes of which they are part, including diversity within species and between species and of ecosystems. So now I'll hand over to Scott to give you a look at the numbers in Otago and yeah, just how diverse that is. Okay.
So our biodiversity, the whole variety of native plants, animals, microorganisms, the genes they contain, and the ecosystems they create is unique to Aotearoa and irreplaceable. Because of its evolution as a group of very isolated islands, Aotearoa has a high proportion of native species that are found nowhere else in the world. And this is more than almost any other country globally. And Otago is one of the most diverse regions for biodiversity in Aotearoa. For example, during a recent workshop to inform biodiversity management areas, an expert panel concluded that Otago probably has the greatest diversity of ecosystems than any other region in Aotearoa. This included at least 38 naturally uncommon ecosystems as identified by researchers from Manaaki Whenua, Landcare Research, and possibly into the mid-40s when looked at more closely by these researchers at the panel. These ecosystems contribute disproportionately to national biodiversity, often inhabited by plants and animals that have specialized adaptations to cope with the harsh environmental conditions that allow for these ecosystems to persist. And Otago also has one naturally uncommon ecosystem that is found nowhere else. And some of you were fortunate to see that on our recent trip. In terms of native species, Otago also stands out as one of the Aotearoa's most diverse regions. For example, with 1,242 native plant species, it is a botanically diverse region and has almost half the amount of vascular plants in Otago as there are nationally. This is from the iconic tussocks to the rare endemic species, with Otago plants being regarded to beautify the landscapes and support vibrant ecosystems. We also know that at least 37 species of native plants are found nowhere else in the country. We also have more species of land-based reptile than any region in the country, including 7 species found only here. For our freshwater fish, it's a similar story, with Otago having more species than any other region, including 8 that are regionally endemic. The recent work being completed in our science team has shown this level across all species groups investigated so far.
Got it. Thank you, Scott. Oh. Any questions at this point?
Muriella?
Yes, thanks. Those numbers of species there, are they just native only species, not including introduced species? Those numbers you have?
Correct, there are native species only.
Okay.
That is probably more a statement than a question, but I want to say thank you. I've been up for some hours reading a plan that makes us look like we've got one of the worst areas doomsday for water and environment. And yet I hear that and I think, my gosh, there are some good things here. So thank you. And I presume when we worry about this, and I've seen it happen at McRae's Line or McRae's Reserve, and I've seen it happen in the spiders and the Maniatoto. When we have these environments and these values sitting right beside actual land use that exists now, we have to be really, really careful that we don't do something as a knee-jerk reaction to something else and cause a depopulation. Would that be a fair comment?
We will address this later in the
Excellent.
talk, but I would say that proportionally, Otago has more threatened or at-risk species than the national average. So we're actually doing better, worse, not better than most other regions.
Okay, well, Scott, if you've got more values, you've said we've got more values and we've got more at risk. I would expect that, because if you've got more values than you will and they're rare, then that would mean that you've ramped up. But the fact that we've still got those values, I would have said was a pretty remarkable thing, given what's suggested as land use change and how devastating it's been.
Yeah, so proportionally, we are often worse off than the national average and then other regions. That's what the recent research is showing.
Even though we've got more numbers, okay.
Correct, it's proportionally worse off, and we've got more extinctions, more data deficient, more threatened or at-risk species.
Gary?
generally.
Thank you. Just on that then, how comparable are we to other regions in effort undertaken or investment in understanding biodiversity and the species we have and protections of them? Is it an apples for apples, or are all regions the same in the efforts that they put towards biodiversity, or is there a difference across the country?
Kia ora. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think, it is true that it's variable. And yeah, I think probably can't say too much more on that without numbers. Yeah.
I can speak to that. So yes, it is variable compared to many other regions in terms of our terrestrial ecologists, which I know the most about. We have less than most. We have more than a couple, and that's only one.
Right. So would there be, if other regions were to put more effort in or have more investment, is there likely to be more findings, more effort, more to protect, say?
I don't think so. That's where the expert panel came in, and they've shown that through their own studies that Otago probably has the most diversity in ecosystems, and then from the regional conservation stations, we're also demonstrating the high number of diversity. So, for instance, we know for the land-based reptiles, we're the most diverse. For the freshwater fishes, we're the most diverse. Probably for the indigenous vascular plants, we would be in the top 3 in terms of diversity. I do have some other projects underway that we can put better numbers on the questions that you're addressing, but generally we would have one of the more diverse regions across the Motu.
Thank you.
Tim?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't be there in person, but you probably don't want me in the room with you. Just a question in regards to the introduced species. Now, you were saying that your biodiversity is relating to Indigenous. How do we treat the likes of species introduced that are also vulnerable? And I'm thinking perhaps around the Heritage Rose Society in North Dunedin. There's a whole lot of roses in the Northern Cemetery that are ancient and only sort of found in this area. So just that's my question. Thanks.
Kia ora, Tim. Good question. So we're going to cover our role in the next few slides, and that's quite clear in that our focus is on Indigenous biodiversity. So we inherit that from the RMA. So that's probably, yeah, we'll get through it, and it'd be good to just check in at that point that that's covered it for you.
That's great. Thank you.
Kia ora, one question from me. How robust and thorough is the threat classification system that works across the country?
Would that be reference to the New Zealand threat classification system or the regional threat classification system?
The first one.
Okay, so the New Zealand threat classification is based off the IUCN red list, so the International Union of Conservation of Nature. It's a rule-based system. When they modified the New Zealand threats classification system, it's supposed to be complementary to the IUCN red list. They modified it, and you may know this already, to account for the small size and of Aotearoa and our island endemics. It's a relatively robust system. The regional conservation statuses that we're referring to, where we've come up with many of these numbers, is again complementary to the New Zealand threat classification system. It uses a similar rule-based approach and just modified for the size of the region. So I consider them to be relatively robust. Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora. So why do we need a biodiversity strategy? So this section will cover a few things. So the legislative and policy reasons. We'll talk about how the strategy supports us to work towards our goals and meet the expectations of our community. And we'll talk about the ways in which Otago benefits from Indigenous biodiversity. So first up, our role, Biodiversity and the Resource Management Act. So I'm not a policy advisor, so I need to use pretty pictures to help me understand the way that all works together. So here's a pretty picture. And really, the role of the Otago Regional Council, which is in the middle there, in the dotted line, is to achieve function, which is maintaining Indigenous biodiversity, to give effect to the purpose of the RMA, as well as the principles of the RMA, those green and yellow pieces there. We also have a role to monitor the state of the environment, and that includes Indigenous biodiversity. So what do we mean by Indigenous biodiversity? We're talking about our native New Zealand species and ecosystems that they're part of. And to elaborate a wee bit on the function contains an objective, which is maintain. And that's recognition that in order to achieve that purpose, we need to maintain Indigenous biodiversity. And that would require more than just managing the externalities of activities. It's broader than that. So there are other players in biodiversity. Mana whenua have an important inherited responsibility as kaitiaki, and our communities are involved and committed. We also have the MFE setting policy direction and reporting on the environment nationally. In terms of understanding our role, it helps to kind of elaborate on a couple of other players, the Department of Conservation and the City and District Councils. So the Department of Conservation is the central government agency charged with conserving New Zealand's natural and historic heritage. It has a national focus on the species that are important to Aotearoa New Zealand, and it provides legal protection for those species and for conservation land. They really do focus their work on conservation land. And because they've got that national focus, it's important to note that the work that they do does not equate to outcomes for Otago, especially when we're thinking about maintaining biodiversity in Otago. We're the regionally focused organisation, and we're charged with maintaining biodiversity in this region. We're charged with maintaining biodiversity that's important to Otago. And there's also plenty of biodiversity that's not on conservation land. You'll be well aware of that. It's also probably worth noting that DOC manages an area the size of, or 3 times the size of Otago, with an equivalent budget to the Hamilton City Council. City and district councils also have a mandate to maintain Indigenous biodiversity, and they have that district focus. So there's a national focus here, a regional focus, and a district focus. And their focus is on controlling land use to maintain Indigenous biodiversity, and they have a series of rules and things to help them with that. And they also use other methods, so they're quite active, doing all sorts of things, as you probably well know. So clearly we all have a part to play, and our roles should be complementary, but we should just make sure that we don't leave any gaps. So with so many players in the biodiversity space, some guidance about our roles would be rather helpful. Luckily, we have that in spades. We have the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and the National Policy Statement Indigenous Biodiversity. They provide clarity of our role, in particular, the leadership role that regional councils have in maintaining biodiversity in the region, and how this works with city, district councils and DOC. They also reflect the kaitiaki role of mana whenua. And it's government direction that gives us clarity on what the maintenance of Indigenous biodiversity looks like. Biodiversity happens across our land, rivers, streams, coasts, and sea. And these documents approach maintaining biodiversity in different ways and with a different focus. So this leaves us to find a consistent and coherent approach from the mountains to the sea. And a regional strategy is one way we can address that. We can also do that through our regional plans, policy statements. So a biodiversity strategy could support Otago to take a coherent approach and achieve our environmental goals. The direction with the most relevance is the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. It focuses on land, but we can benefit from how it expands on what the RMA means by maintaining biodiversity. So it says that maintaining biodiversity requires maintaining the size of populations of species, that they continue to occupy the areas they naturally would, that the properties and functions of the places where they live continue, full range and extent of those places, habitats, remain, that there continues to be connectivity between the habitats and some buffering around them, that these species and ecosystems are resilient in the face of things like climate change or other changes, and where necessary, the restoration and enhancements of ecosystems and habitats might be necessary. So this is what we're supposed to be achieving, and this policy was sculpted over more than a decade. We know parts of it are planned to be repealed, but much of it remains in place and it's informative. It also provides some good guidance for a biodiversity strategy. There's an entire appendix that helps out with that, and plenty throughout the document. So very useful for the likes of me. Okay. So the second reason that it's important for us to have a strategy is it's one way that we can achieve some of the goals that you councillors have set in the strategic directions. So subject-specific strategies like the biodiversity strategy or the strategic climate action plan are how we set ourselves up to achieve those legislative roles and our goals. And those strategies need to be in alignment, so you can expect us to be taking into account the strategic climate action plan with this piece of work. And really, we want them to work together to make the ship go faster. In particular, with this biodiversity strategy, we'll be focusing on, in the green, I can't quite see that, but I'll read it out, healthy ecosystems and arresting biodiversity loss, predicting and addressing emerging environmental issues before they arise. And in the red, ecosystems are resilient in the face of natural hazards. And in the orange, our communities are supported and empowered to achieve better environmental outcomes. And underpinning all that, we'll be seeking to deliver on the partnership goals that you've set. So a biodiversity strategy is one of the solutions to the challenge you've set with these goals. So third reason, and perhaps might have ranked number one, to be fair, is that our communities have expectations. And the most recent long-term plan submissions highlighted an increasing mandate from our communities. They told us they strongly support increased environmental funding, even during a cost of living crisis. They support us being more ambitious. They also expect us to lead, collaborate, and to bring in additional funding from others. There was support for a biodiversity monitoring program, and there's an expectation that we integrate our biodiversity and biosecurity functions in a useful way and take a pragmatic approach to pest management. So a biodiversity strategy is also a solution to the challenge our communities have set. If you needed another reason, Otago communities benefit from Indigenous biodiversity. We all can probably relate to the identity that Indigenous biodiversity provides us. You've heard from Mana Whenua that Indigenous biodiversity in Otago is fundamental. It's a taonga, an integral part of Mahika Kai, connection to whakapapa, many other practices, and connections and responsibilities. So loss of biodiversity is not good for that, for relationships, responsibilities, and practices. Biodiversity also inspires us to get outside and move. I know it does for me. And there's a growing body of knowledge supporting that time spent in nature is good for our mental health. Probably knew that, didn't we? Indigenous biodiversity also supplies a whole lot of things that we need for sustenance and for safety through things like pollination, soil formation, flood mitigation, erosion control, and water supply. I promise I didn't try to make that rhyme. For example, in 2006, Te Papanui Conservation Park, a large reserve protecting some tussock grassland and wetlands in the Upper Tairi, provided the Otago region with $136 million worth of water resources. That same ecosystem moderates the flow of the Tairi River, absorbing heavy rainfall and releasing it slowly. The $2.2 billion Otago tourism industry relies on biodiversity. In 2007, ecotourism contributed $100 million on the Otago Peninsula alone, and approximately 70% of international visitors come to New Zealand for activities involving nature-based or involving nature. So those two examples are just the tip of the iceberg. That's just where there's been work done. The economic value of services that nature provides to the New Zealand economy is $57 billion. Any questions at this point?
Thanks, Shay. We've got Andrew and Councillor Noon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question just goes back to the biodiversity strategy, the national policy statement. And on your slide there, you've got section 1.7, then it goes down to, it's got A and down to B. And it says, where necessary, the restoration and enhancement of ecosystem habitat. So most of the language is about maintaining, but then it moves to a point where the direction around you need to actually understand probably what you've got, what it needs. Have I read that correctly? In terms of the direction going forward, it's more than just holding the line. It's a suggestion that you need to identify where it needs enhancement and carry out that enhancement. Is that what it's saying?
Absolutely, and you know it's much cheaper and better to keep what you have, right? But it is a recognition in the policy statement, I think, that you know that where we're at requires we might need to intervene and enhance. Can probably all think of examples.
I suppose my point is it's more than just holding the line. That's what I'm trying.
Point.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Apologies for lateness. I may have missed it at the start. Thank you. Have we had an opportunity to review previous biodiversity plans or strategies and successes and maybe identified learning? So like, have we done that audit check? So this is not just
Absolutely.
okay. And how did that go?
So we'll cover it in a couple of slides, but it was a good process. I think we learned a lot. Yeah, well,
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
I think your slide shared the role of other agencies. I presume you're talking about statutory roles. It appears to me that the most effective role is actually possibly QE2. And you haven't listed that, and I'm intrigued as to why not, because it seems to be, I think, the hardest one to touch wood, unlock. Although that I know it's being challenged at the moment. Yeah, is that only because you've looked at the statutory roles?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I was looking at the statutory roles and was drawing on a report that was published, Willis report a number of years ago about these roles. But it is a good point, and we're taking a note. I think it's an important thing to consider here. You know, QE2 has a statute that underpins it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, again, understanding the absolute gift that many people have given to us in a way that they carry on paying for it is something that we need to value. And it's pretty important to the mix. I think, yeah, and apart from the fact that it doesn't seem to be able to be opened up for mining or anything else, but equally that it's seems to come at very little cost to the community. And it's something that I think, as far as fencing and other things we've been challenged in the past to have role in, I'd like to ensure that it's seen as a partner relatively high up in the process.
Can I comment?
Yeah, that's good.
So shortly after I joined the OIC, I asked the QE2 representative to see how New Zealand compared with our contributions to QE2 compared to other regions. And at that stage we weren't. So I'm really pleased that we are now. Like you say, QE2 has an important role for environmental values and persisting in perpetuity. While we have quite a bit of QE2 land in Otago, we have one of the lowest amounts of land properties that are in QE2. So we have a lot of land that's mainly contributed to one station, but the number of actual people that do have QE2 in Otago is very low.
And part of that is the process and the lack of support, because people cannot get through the process. So, yeah, yeah.
I agree.
And I think that's why I want them in there. Yeah.
We are partnering with QE2 as well and providing support to them to enable that. So
I appreciate that's a relatively recent development, but I think the time lag to get in to QE2 is still well over a year, not two.
That's my understanding, yes.
Can I add, companion to QE2 is Ngā Whenua Rāhui. It's not a lot of Māori land, it applies to Māori land. It's not a lot of Māori land in Otago, but they do function here.
Is that then down the Taieri Gorge, Lower Taieri Gorge?
We're still waiting for them to visit the site and.
Oh, okay. Similar problem.
Really good point made. So I've been furiously scribbling notes, so appreciate the comments. Any further questions? I think we can move on. We'll get up in a minute and sort of get into the workshop part of this, but through the strategic directions, you set a goal, an outcome that biodiversity is flourishing. So really keen to hear what that means to you, and actually to you personally, I think is the point there. And so we'll spend 5 minutes writing on sticky notes what flourishing biodiversity means to you, and feel free to use as many sticky notes as you like. And then once you're done, if you can head on up over there, there's a big post-it on the wall, and if you could stick the sticky note on the wall around that, and we'll gather around and sort of talk to our sticky notes.
I was just wondering, do you mean like literally, like what is that, like how would we interpret that term, or like what is the significance of flourishing biodiversity to us?
I would encourage you to do both. That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Quarter of an hour, is it, for that?
So we'll spend 5 minutes doing the writing, and then 10 minutes to the chat. Yeah, if anyone needs pickies, I can supply. Lloyd's well finished.
Tim, can you hear us? Just wanted to put yours in the comments. They could be copied down and put on a post-it note.
Yep, okay, I can do that.
I go. See the chat.
Do one share.
Yeah, I have the chat here theoretically.
I'll just
Say theoretically. Oops.
Not for 15 minutes. You said 10 minutes.
Is there any biodiversity left in West Bay?
So,
Just a question.
yes.
It's all in the nursery.
There's heaps underneath our pine trees.
The answer is yes, there is.
Oh, I think.
Always.
We've got ryegrass and cotton.
Got humans. Cows.
It's definitely bush lawyer.
Sorry.
I know there's
Definitely
definitely
bush
bush lawyer.
I've got a uniquely West Otago thing on my blue stickies, being the only blue person in the room.
Oh, I know who the blue is. How's that audio for you, Tim?
Yes, it's good. Very good. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so I apologize for the memory test because I'm going to read out the first part of your post-it and ask you to speak to it. So maybe we'll start with Lloyd, seeing as I can tell which one says that. So biodiversity is embedded in our life because it is
Uniquely New Zealand.
Yeah.
So that's my big one.
Oh, you might need your mic. Sorry, Lloyd.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. Isn't that an awesome statement? Just saying. So I think at the end of the day, the true biodiversity is biodiversity that we all live and have in our everyday lives. It's not something that's like really special. So that's where I think we need to get biodiversity too. So that's, and it's unique because it's uniquely us, it's uniquely New Zealand, and that's part of our unique New Zealand story. That's where that one comes from.
Being able to see mohua.
Oh, so being able to see the mohua on my walks while I'm walking up the Blue Mountains, Tapawaianuku, to the summit, and because I understand that there's mohua on the Blue Mountains, but I'm yet to spot one. So it's one of my goals in life.
Down in the rankle burning.
Yeah, the rankle burn, yeah, down the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh, by the road that goes over.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but you got a thresh with a bush,
Tangent.
Dot for the
Biodiversity corridors.
Oh, so biodiversity, so that's been a long-term thing of mine. So like 4 or 5 years ago, one of my big goals in life was to create biodiversity corridors from the mountains to basically the mountains, not so much to the sea, but to the waterways. So to the main waterways, i.e. Pomahaka River. And so that was what inspired me around our, why I'm involved basically is as you get into to do that, but with our planning approach, but it didn't quite turn out the way the initial vision was because nature's still nature. It was quite hard to plant beside major rivers. So, but it's all part of that it's the linking Biodiversity basically, which is where I see it. And I'm also quite inspired by when I go and visit my daughter and son-in-law in Taranaki. If you've ever flown into the airport and you look out the window of the plane, you can see the plantings coming off the mountain to the sea. And so that's probably where I get that idea from. And I think that, that's, if we're going to have something, that's a good place to start. And it's in everyday stuff. It's just not like a dock reserve bush here. It's like everywhere, all little woodways here.
Great image. And biodiversity, talking native bush, attracts birds, etc., becomes part of New Zealand's story being incorporated.
It's probably just overall the same thing all put together in one. So yeah, so that's like if we can get the bush, if we can reclaim Papatūānuku or get the bush coming, the other biodiversity will follow. So we're going to be careful. We have to start at the very beginning, which is for me, it's the bush, I guess, because everything comes in underneath that. In my little world, we're bush people, not tussock people. Yeah.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Have you? Yeah. Remember, doesn't do sticky notes. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to go to these pink ones here. Self-sustaining ecosystems. It was.
Oh, yeah, that was me. Yeah, I guess when you drive around and you see a whole lot of little remnants just hanging on for grim death, and they're just slowly dying. That annoys me. Makes me feel really terrible. That we get to a stage where things are self-sustaining, they're not getting invaded by heaps of weeds or disease or just population decline, because that's what thriving's about. Yeah.
Yeah. A bit of resilience.
Yeah, resilience.
Yep.
Cool. This you also,
Yeah, I think so, yep.
nature is driving all around us. We notice it and
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Similar to Lloyd on the, what it means is just as we are part of the ecosystem, I suppose, and nature's all around us and we're noticing it and we're enjoying it in our daily lives. It was exactly the same as Lloyd's one, I think.
Thanks, Gretchen. I believe this is you, Kay. Strong biosecurity control, especially waterborne weeds, fish.
That's self-explanatory. It's the flourishing biodiversity. Unfortunately, if you're looking at the picture, you want to do all the nice stuff, but you have to have that other stuff, which is less sexy, but is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, cool. Is that established methods, how to create habitats?
Yeah, I think we just need to be telling people more about the educational stuff. How do you do it for skunks and how do you do it for a lot of those things? People think just go and ride here and plant and they'll come, but you can do it better. If we know better, you can actually look at what you're doing.
Cool. 3 bellbirds, Piwaka singing around the region.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, that's that is the picture that would give it to me. As one motion. Yeah, the sound.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I've got predator control in there. The other one is the deliberate islands, and I think this is something that we as a region have done very poorly. You know, we are in a city now that had in European times one of the first things was a town belt being established. We've done nothing since that town belt was established in Dunedin. There's plenty, and yet Dunedin has expanded outside of that. We don't do deliberate planning. Dock have at times, but that is less likely to happen in the future. But even maintaining those or deliberately planning for the ecosystems to be able to have it spread and be resilient is poorly done, and it is sad. So that's both blue and green.
Cool.
And that's, I think those cover my points in, so you don't have to read the rest of my writings.
Okay.
Or try to.
Predator control.
That was it, yeah.
Deer, pigs, rats and mice, cats. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, yeah, that's one.
Citizen science.
Oh, citizen science is important. Making it easy. iNaturalist is fantastic, but we should be ensuring that that's enabled and bragging rights to those communities that have got those things. We don't often respect that. Letting people brag actually gives them really good science as well.
I saw some of that happening just before on this table. Natural habitats are widespread, is that you as well?
That might have been me.
I think it's not me, yeah.
And I think that recognition that for healthy species, we need to protect their habitats, and that habitat protection is such an essential foundation of
Thank you. Gap analysis.
That could be me.
Where to bring back weaker.
Yeah, no. So what don't we have that we should have in this environment as part of that ecosystem? But also, what are the habitats that we don't have that are within cooey of the birds flying? So you know you've got the sanctuaries, but you need to have those outer rings of islands or for things to be able to move safely, or corridors. Yeah.
Okay. Move on to the purple over here. Essential duty of society to maintain and enhance biodiversity.
It's purple.
That was me. I think it's a fundamental duty of looking after our environment. We're one and part of the same, and so it's it's understated on one sticker. What that means.
But you did do 5.
Yeah. Yeah, intergenerational benefits, opportunity, connectivity.
Yeah, that's me again, and I do see it's a similar thing to the first one, a duty to think of the future generations and to build on what we know and what we can do. that connectivity. The benefits of that are manyfold. So look, it's stating the obvious, I think.
Well-being and valuing our environment go hand in hand. Is that
Sorry, the
well-being in our environment?
same thing, yeah,
yeah.
yes.
Mahika Kai, Mataraka, transmission.
Yeah, well, that's quite important for us because our knowledge is really much aligned to the ability to use and access mahika kai. That's how you transfer your knowledge from generation to generation and retain that customary knowledge and connectivity, all of those kōrero that go with those customs. So it's fundamental to being kaitiaki. You really, it's difficult to maintain and uphold those customs if you cannot access and undertake those practices. So it's central, it's elementary, it's also an impact on your mana if you're not able to uphold those things.
Thanks, Edward. Healthy ecosystem, sustainable living, was that you as well? Okay, we've got down bottom right here, monoculture, arrow seconding environment and imbalance, arrow death.
That would be me. And that's just the idea that the larger the biodiversity, the healthier the biome of the world. And but there is another one there that qualifies that to some degree around indigeneity. There's obviously some pests and things that will lead to a monoculture if they're not well controlled. But yeah, so it's just that idea that the biodiversity is integral to our health.
Well, forgive me if I repeat that one. I found it yet. Flourishing biodiversity, health of all beings.
Same thing.
Same, right?
Different. I got a bit more articulate then.
Flourishing biodiversity equals inclusivity.
Yeah, that's a thing too. Is the inclusivity of all beings, and this whole idea of humans being the only species that's on the earth or that's important, and to include in our care and our thinking all beings is important.
Retention of known species and reversal of extinction risk.
Yep.
Okay. Anything to add to it? Okay.
I suppose my two statements were that and the sustainably managed habitats where species thrive. And my thinking is, by all means, the ability to protect what we know, but have it flourish and survive alongside everything else that we do. And so that rather than everything else excluded, I have 5 or 6 sites of biodiversity type activities, species that are protected currently just within the businesses we run. And the less people that know about them, the better, because we can protect them. The more people that know about them, the more interest there will be, and we've managed these for years, and we see them flourishing. So I think it happens possibly quite a lot out across the region anyway. Yeah, but it's just the ability for what is out there to happily cohabitate and alongside everything else.
Thank you. Sustainably managed habitats where species thrive. Yep. Anything? Cool. Flourishing all life.
That was me. And others have said that. Yeah, I just had a couple of simple ones here. So flourishing of life. And the other one was biodiversity markers. That's just something for me. Like I know at my place, you know, the wood pigeons, the kerroo came and stayed, and then tui would come from time to time and spend more time. And I know I've done something positive when the kaka arrived, and they haven't arrived yet. Maybe I need to go and talk to Arakinui and get a gate also. But I'm waiting for that time.
Good call. Okay,
When they start breeding.
we'll go to Tim online. Re-establish native habitats to support indigenous species, e.g. yellow penguin. Replanting of reserves. Oh, yellow penguin trust, replanting of reserves. Marginal strips planted with indigenous plants, endangered species, stop declining.
Yeah, I guess I've sort of just looked at it through the perspective of my involvement with the Yellow Penguin Trust. It's the destruction of habitat and biodiversity that's caused the decline in the penguins. So I think if I just was to put it very simply, a flourishing biodiversity means there's a halt in the decline of endangered species.
Thanks, Tim. Okay. Connected protected ecosystems, That
was me. And the rest of that chain. Yeah, I mean, connected protected ecosystems, I'm pretty self-explanatory, but just maintaining those ecosystems across the region and across the diversity of the ecosystem that we have to maintain the biodiversity within. Yeah, and then I think, do you want me to?
Yeah,
Go on,
do any
I can't read it from here, but
sorry, memory test. Ecosystem self-sufficient resilient.
yeah, that and I think that was around flourishing enough and being resilient enough to provide Mehika Kai as well as all the other ecosystem services that we sort of rely on that biodiversity for, whether that's the direct stuff like Mehika Kai and then people's like hunting and fishing and stuff, but also the water quality filtration that we get from it and all these other ecosystem services. That was one of the points, was just about knowledge in the community about the biodiversity. People know what's out there and what the risks are to it and the importance of that.
Land use fitting with the surrounding ecosystems.
Yeah, just like appropriate land use for the surrounding ecosystems to minimize the adverse effects that our activities have on those ecosystems. Yes.
Urban stuff.
Oh yeah, I had one about just urban biodiversity, like urban environments providing or adapting to accommodate urban biodiversity as well, sort of touching on what Kate was talking about earlier, but even the outside of the town belt and stuff, the urban landscape as well, providing for species that can adapt to those environments.
And pests.
Yeah, and then obviously, I think I put that introduced predators and invasive pests of all kinds of taxa, plants and stuff too, are controlled and managed to an extent that, or suppressed to an extent that indigenous biodiversity can thrive.
Thank you, Councillor Ware. One here, wide variety of native species present.
Yes, I think I said that, yeah, so I guess that's to do with the variety, isn't it? That there's lots of things there, as we've heard from Scott earlier, lots of stuff there, as much of as possible is around.
Fabulous. Relationships between all living things.
Might have been me. I think I've sort of talked to that, but one of the things I wanted to add there was just watching biodiversity increase and how quickly it will bounce back when very little's done. And I just want to tell you a wee story about that. When I bought my property where I live in Frankton, we planted, so about 30 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, they had the Project Gold. Dr. Mr. remember the doc, Project Gold? And our son brought home lots of little plants and things, and we planted them. We've only got a 400 square metre section, but we planted it all in these native trees, and nothing really happened until about 8 years ago, when the Whakatapu Environmental Reforestation Trust started planting down at Frankton Beach and Peace Park, and that is now completely planted and has provided this huge breeding place for native birds. And we now have kirarutui, piwakawaka, just like korimako, the whole gamut coming into our trees, because our trees have become a corridor between two sites, two reforested sites, and it is just incredible. And that's happened in 8 years, and it's happened with small suburban neighborhoods, just throwing the plants in that came from a thing. And I just wanted to point out how that thriving of all living things can really happen with not very much effort. It's a nice little story.
Cool.
I don't talk all that. But that's what my bush does, because we're at the far end of town. We never used to get any birds. And then you plant a bit of bush and it's taken 10, 12 years, and the birds get to us, but they go back again. But everybody else in between is not getting the benefit of them. Yeah. But it's all about starting, isn't it?
Absolutely. Go to the biodiversity, particularly Indigenous to healthy the environment. I think you've talked about that one. Right? Plentiful native birds and birdsong.
Yeah, as a city dweller, that's the sort of thing that jumps out at me if I'm looking around, and that makes me happiest if you hear that. And I know it's sort of just one tiny little bit of it all, but it's sort of the, the sort of pinnacle for city dwellers, I think, would be nice.
And the hidden biodiversity as well.
Yeah, so it's not just the birds and the trees, it's also what's happening in the soils and the little bugs and waterways and things. And that soil health, perhaps is less exciting to many people, but perhaps in fact that's more important in the end. So let's not forget that one too.
I think just a couple. So flourishing biodiversity, understanding what we have, situation, do what we can, discussion enhancement.
That's me, and sort of like others, put the hat on that I've worn over the years, and being a former landowner, and that's basically what we did. We determined what we had, so an biodiversity assessment done, and put in partnership with ORC and QE2, and obviously fenced off native bush and that sort of thing. But my main point really is to accept we haven't got a natural state anymore. So, it's great to be able to enhance and going forward, but there needs to be a bit of an acceptance that over the last however long, a whole lot has been destroyed. So, there's got to be an acceptance that we've got human activity, and we've got biodiversity that needs support. But, there has got to be some sort of acceptance that you're not going to get back to a natural state. That's what I'm trying to say. But there's a way to work in a balanced fashion to get the best of both. If that makes sense.
Yes. Increased number of fauna and flora seen in all parts of Otago. Did I miss somebody? Okay, I think we've talked about it. It's yellow. Who's that one? Might be, looks like Kate.
Oh, sorry, what was the article?
Increased numbers of flora and fauna seen in all parts.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're spitting about that quick. Yeah.
It is about the breadth, the whole. Yeah, if you only have small pockets, and you're not going to have resilience.
Great. Well, we got through it. Any thoughts that we missed? Anything to add?
I think acknowledging again the huge amount that, as Gary said, and Andrew, that is actually out there in private land, It's not something that is, and we won't know it. I think acknowledging that we don't know what is out there, and it'd be great that some people are doing it.
Okay. Thanks for that, everybody. That's great to get your insight into what was meant by that flourishing biodiversity goal or vision. I really appreciate it. All right. Excuse me while I wrangle my slides. So why now? So in this section, we'll talk about is Indigenous biodiversity being maintained? And we already got a wee snippet of that. And if not, why not? And whether our current strategy is helping us to maintain it. As you mentioned, Councillor Scott, we've done a reflection there, and what the opportunity is in Otago right now, especially around the restoration economy that exists. And then we'll talk about the capabilities and skills we have in ORC, in the implementation world. Just a bit of a snapshot of this section. So yeah, to start off with, really important for us to understand, is Indigenous biodiversity being maintained? I'll hand over to Scott to give us the lowdown on that.
So a report by the International Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and intergovernmental organisation established to improve the interface between science and policy on issues of biodiversity and ecosystems came out in 2019, demonstrating that the world is in a biodiversity crisis. The following year, the New Zealand government released its own report on biodiversity in Otago, concluding that we are also in a biodiversity crisis. Recent work in Otago shows that we are no better. We can get a picture of this from the recent regional conservation statuses. On this slide, we can see the proportion of threatened or at-risk species across groups in Otago compared to Aotearoa generally. And when we refer to threatened species, they are those ones that will go extinct if nothing is done to halt their decline. While at-risk species are a bit more resilient because of the size and state of their populations, but they are likely to become threatened if pressures on them worsen. So for species for which we have data, we know 96% of our reptiles are threatened or at risk, which is comparable, if not a little higher, to the national average. 44% of our plant species are threatened or at risk, also a comparable amount. But it should be noted that a further 10% are data deficient, and that's where we don't have, there's insufficient data to make an assessment, with it being well known nationally and globally that data deficients tend to be threatened, more likely to be threatened. And 100% of our bats that are present or near the region are either threatened or at risk of extinction in Otago. And then for our nationally uncommon ecosystems, we do, which went aside to a different framework, it shows that 70% of them are threatened in Otago compared to a national average of 63%. So proportionally, we're doing worse off in terms of the ecosystems as well. Yeah. Thank you. So globally, and this is demonstrated in this schematic, these are the drivers of decline for biodiversity loss globally, and they split them into the 3 rounds of land, freshwater, and marine. And this was came out of that report by the International Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems. And globally, those drivers of decline are direct exploitation, introduced invasive species, land sea use change, pollution, and climate change. Why there a slight difference in the proportions in Aotearoa from the little work that has been done compared to that globally. Here, the majority of that decline is the result of land use change and introduced invasive species. And that's something that's quite common in island nations, particularly the introduced invasive species. And recent work in Otago shows that this is similar to the national drivers of decline. To bend this curve on biodiversity loss, these drivers of decline need to be addressed.
Thanks, Scott. So what about our current biodiversity strategy, the Otago Biodiversity Strategy 2018? Is that helping us address this and maintain biodiversity? So we did an internal preliminary review, and so for the action plan, which was 2019 to 2024, that's now concluded and largely been achieved. So when we set out to do things, we deliver. And that's meant that the Otago agencies and mana whenua are better aligned. We have the Otago Biodiversity Forum. OSC is better aligned internally. We have an internal biodiversity working group. We're also building a clearer view of the state of Indigenous biodiversity in Otago, as we just saw, and across not just the terrestrial, but the freshwater and marine as well. We don't yet have all the answers, but that shouldn't stop us forging ahead. We know enough from the regional threat assessments, mapping and monitoring programs. And we're much better engaged with our communities through our work programs, initiative like catchment advisors, integrated catchment management. And we support and empower those communities through those ICM and increases to the Eco Fund and other incentive funding and things like support for predator-free Dunedin. So we have a solid foundation. But the internal review found that despite the progress we've had there, building that strong foundation, our progress towards achieving or maintaining biodiversity, which is sort of the goal we have, has not been significant. So we're kind of on a trajectory like this. And now it's timely to lift that trajectory and yes, timely to have a new strategy and take another look at our approach. Hopefully that covers what you are after, Councillor Scott.
Am I able to reply to that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's good. It's good that there's that consideration, Shay. So do we, I mean, is it actually an aspiration of this council to halt biodiversity loss? Do we know what the scale, just to, I mean, the situation's not great, but just to reduce the decline, to halt the decline, do we know what is actually required to achieve that? Because we're saying we're not on track. So I assume we're hoping to get on track. We know what's required to achieve to halt biodiversity loss.
It's a really good question. I think that will form the first piece of work on the strategy, is diagnosing what's causing that, where we're at. That internal review was the experts assembled, consensus around how things are tracking in the different areas they're across. So that's where that kind of information came from. But yeah, it'll keep me busy for a couple of months, I suspect, understanding those elements that need to be.
Because like what we're doing might be, getting some improvement at, the gradient like that, but in fact, we need this just to halt it, let alone to reinstate it, and to actually reinstate it. You might need this, and as Andrew said, I mean, a lot of our land is tied up in private land. So, where are those opportunities to make those gains, realistically, Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Scott. It's a good point, and I think that those are the sorts of questions we need to ask, and that will affect the approach we take for the strategy.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so what's the opportunity in front of us? So the Jobs for Nature job stimulus provided $61.6 million worth of projects in Otago. There's 910 jobs and was a catalyst for a restoration economy in Otago. So there's a gap left by the conclusion of that. That's concluding more or less now. Many of you will be aware of that. But a restoration economy now exists. So that term refers to economic activity that contributes to improving and restoring of functioning ecosystems. Yeah, so other things that we have in that restoration economy are mana whenua leading projects. We've got our communities taking action, and we have a trained workforce. A big effort went into that job stimulus program and training people up to deliver on these sorts of work, or this sort of work. And not only that, but these trained up people are supported by an ecosystem of entrepreneurs and organizations that know how to get things done. That approach also crowded in a whole lot of funding too. Just under 10 million of that 61.6 was private or philanthropic money. And it's not just about new plantings. That might be quite an obvious outcome of that program, but around half of the effort has gone into maintaining what we have. And a good chunk of the rest of that was training. And this is a much better investment because prevention is better than a cure, and it's far cheaper to keep what you have and look after it and invest in it. And also because some losses of biodiversity are irreversible, species extinctions. So we have the opportunity to capitalize some of that.
I think we have a question.
I think, yeah.
Lord, I'm sorry, this is a very exciting area for me because we're seeing this up in the headwaters particularly, and it feels to me that there is an opportunity to even move the base of the economy up there, to diversify. They're always trying to diversify away from tourism, right? It's a hell place to be if really trying to base your economy around something that difficult. But it seems like a whole pile of these jobs are still in existence without that Jobs for Nature money. They're still going. These people are still finding ways to go. I mean, some places have managed to retain even up to half of their original workforce. So somehow or another, and I'd love to really understand how they're going and how we might shift some basis of the economy into this restoration area. And I'm delighted to see a slide entitled Restoration Economy, because I think that there's something there. And I don't know, have you got ideas further on that? Sorry, I haven't been through your full slide back before today. But
no problem. Great, Corridor. This is why it's here. I think it's an important thing for us to explore, and there's an opportunity that's in front of us, not just necessarily to maintain biodiversity, but also to support our communities, right? As you described there, and also to maintain those gains. That's a lot of effort that's gone in. How do we make sure that's retained? Because
and that's the imperative, isn't it? To make, because there's restoration that will slip away and slip back into weeds and degradation if it's not maintained. So how do we do that? That's
I definitely think it's important for us to understand that in more detail. What's going on now? We are seeing the tail end of that funding, and it will be interesting to see if that can continue up to half.
They can hold on to those people.
And of course, the additional environmental funding approved in the current long-term plan could capitalise on this. And I just probably would note that there's a workshop scheduled for the 22nd of October. I think there for Libby. Talk about these funds more broadly. So I guess again, it's timely that we have a strategy to address the opportunity and the role there in maintaining Indigenous biodiversity. Any questions on that one? Thank you. So biodiversity strategy will need to define both where we want to get to, and we've heard quite a bit about where we need to get to, from the legislation, and our goals, what the community said, and the approach we take to get there. So when we're contemplating that, it's important to understand the capabilities or the muscles we've built already. Building new capabilities takes a lot of time and money, energy, it's risky, and doing the things that you're good at is usually a bit of a winner. So especially when we've got multiple organisations in the space, so understanding what we're good at helps us out there too. So I'll just hand over to Libby, who's going to give a bit of a rundown of those capabilities and the pieces of work that are on the go.
Touché. So you've all seen a different version of those pictures on the slide previously. So within the environmental implementation team, we've got different teams and programs of work, and this is just a very quick overview of that work that we're undertaking. So we have a biodiversity program, a biosecurity program, a freshwater program, and we have an integrated catchment management program, which is bringing all of those different programs together and empowering our communities to be able to undertake some of that work themselves, and to also help us understand what needs to happen in those communities. So the capabilities, so for our capabilities, we've got a focus on partnering. So some examples of where we're doing that are the Otago Biodiversity Forum, our site-led programs in biosecurity with Mana Whenua, the Southern Alliance. So the Southern Alliance is where we're partnering with Environment Canterbury and Environment Southland to ensure that we're doing best practice biosecurity work in the lower part of the South Island. And a specific example of that is around our marine biosecurity program that we're in the infancy of developing, but we're working very closely with Environment Southland and Environment Canterbury, as well as other regional and unitary councils across the country, to ensure we have the best program that we can have. We also have national programs for wallabies and wilding conifers that we deliver in partnership with MPI and Mana Whenua. We also have our Toitu Te Hakapupu project that we're delivering, as well as maintaining the games. Our second one on the list up there is empowering communities. So through that, we have our integrated catchment management work program. We provide education, advocacy and advice through our biosecurity teams and our catchment advisors. We run the Eco Fund, and we have incentives funding as well that support our overarching 3 programs of work. And we have a community-led rabbit program. We have catchment advisor work that they undertake every day. We have biosecurity collaborative groups. We provide funding to Otago catchment communities, and we have a hill country erosion program that we're developing as well. And then we also undertake regulation as part of our biosecurity program. And then the last one on there for priority projects, we have Lake Hayes, Lake Tuakitoto and Tomahawk Lagoon that we are continuing to deliver as well.
Thanks, Libby. And change the slide. So any questions before we move on?
Sorry, it relates back to what Scott said about the deficient data, and we're worse off than nationwide average or whatever. But I was trying to understand, Scott, how do you determine that the deficiency generally would indicate there's biodiversity at risk? Well, you said something along those lines. I was trying to think, there must be something that drives that, or have some basis to say that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think Gary also asked it at the previous time I presented on the regional conservation status. So in terms of that category for data deficient, you assign it when there's insufficient data. You try to give a threat status, so threatened, at risk, not threatened, where you have the information to be able to do it. Our expert panel cumulatively for the Indigenous SEO path was well over 100 years. They've walked most of the region. We also consulted other experts, and they did not have the information to confidently assign those species with a threat status. And the chances of that happening, shown globally and nationally, are usually because those species are threatened. There's just not enough information out there because they're very rare in the landscape generally, or they've declined recently, that you can't give it a threat status. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection in terms of species loss and such like that, we are one of the worst in the world. You know, in fact, I think we were the second worst in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's how bad it is. And Otago is part of New Zealand, and I mean, that's our benchmark at the moment, that we've got to probably understand that and then get a plan to do something about it. For goodness sake.
Can I respond to that? Because I sense that that's some pushback. But as Scott has alluded to, New Zealand is actually a little bit unique, a little bit different than a large mass of countries. Like Europe, for example, you've got an island nation that has threats through, you know, marine activity and God knows whatever else. So you may well be right, Brian, but we're also probably we have perhaps a more challenging task in front of us than a lot of other countries.
Well, we certainly have a more challenging task because of the state of it, but we're not the only island in the world.
No.
No. Okay. Past.
Councillor Weir, then some of it.
Sorry, just a small technical question on the slide around that, the same slide, we've been talking about around the decline. I was just looking at the percentage for the bats, and I was just trying to figure out how it was 80%. There's less than 5 species out there, or is that including like I don't know.
So are you talking about the national, the 80%?
Yeah,
There are 5 species that are threatened or at risk.
Oh, okay,
Because
that's
you've got
including
the subspecies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
so you've got the long-tailed bat, you've got the subspecies of the short-tailed bat, and then you've got the lesser short-tailed bat, and then you've got the greater short-tailed bat, and then we've got the vagrant, the non-resident native little fly fox. That's only been appeared in Aotearoa twice, once in Hamilton in 1926, and earlier this year in Blenheim. So that's where the numbers come from.
Okay, cool. That was the fruit bit that I was missing. I was trying to like hit those in my head.
That was seen in Blenheim, was that?
Yeah, it didn't last very long. Colder temperatures. Correct, yeah, you're an Australian vagrant. If I could quickly comment on the comment about our threatened or at risk species. 4,000, over 4,000 of the 14,000 that have been assessed under the New Zealand threat classification system are threatened or at risk. And that's the highest number of with a heightened risk of extinction from the recent review, as far as I'm aware. We used to be the second worst after Hawaii, I believe. Yeah.
Councillor Summer.
But yeah, there are some challenges.
Yes, just building on that discussion we had there and going back to an earlier slide of Shay's about that drivers of biodiversity loss, where you identified the main drivers of change are land use change and introduced invasive species. So that land use change, does that sort of largely equate to habitat loss? Or is it more complex than that?
So yes, it would have been a lot of habitat loss and then degradation, and then you get the compounding with the introduced alien species, and that will include both the plants and the animals. So the more fragmented the landscape becomes, the more prone to invasion by those introduced alien species. And it,
Okay, and look, no, thanks. And also identifying those drivers there, the time frames we're talking about, we're not just talking about the last couple of decades, we're talking about 150, 200 years or even more in that. Correct, yeah, right, thanks.
Councillor Wilson, did you have your hand
I
up?
did have my hand up. I just want to check where we're going with this. I'm not in our role, because while you've got the drivers for change there, one of the big drivers of anything being lost is total ignorance, and actions taken absolutely innocently because the data and the information isn't known. And so you've given us at the start guidance for our role, and you talked about the NPS-IB. I just want to understand what our role is to both know and to provide and educate on what is there, rather and separately the regulatory space, because they're very distinct things, and I know which is the most effective, but I'm not sure what we've actually been doing in that space. Because Scott, I've loved getting all of your reports, but from my mind, they sound like they're relatively recent knowledge base that we have we been not doing our job, or is it that we have new roles that we're just picking up? Because they all seem to be part of the picture in the background that I don't understand. Sorry.
Sorry, so the first question, sorry, Kate, you might have to help me.
No. I understand the regulatory role, sort of, but is it our role to and I think it is because we're doing it, is to know what we have and where it is, and to educate people about it. And have we been doing that? Because it's fine to say land use change, but if we haven't been doing our role, who owns it? Is it the person doing the land use change, or is it us for not making that knowledge and not having that knowledge? Because I actually think I want to, before we go too much far into the next strategy, is actually understand what we have been doing and haven't been doing, and what our roles have been and haven't been.
So I think just to address the role element, part of our role is to monitor state of the environment. I think broadly, I'd like leave Scott to answer what that looks like and what that looks like nationally as well. But other parts of our role include, yes, that regulatory function, but other methods too. So it is reasonable for us to be doing education and working with our communities. And I think that overview from the B is a pretty good snapshot of what we're doing in some of that. Probably one of the other pieces that's quite baked into that is education. Sorry.
And the other part, I don't think we'll ever fully know everything about biodiversity in our region, and Scott might be able to tell me I'm wrong there, but we use other people's information as well. So we don't have to have all of the data, but we can utilise information that MFE has, or DOC have, or LINZ have, or private landowners have, so that helps us understand more about what we have and what we want to protect. So I don't think it's only a role for ORC. I think and so I talked about the partnerships that we've got and that we're growing. So the Biodiversity Forum, working with Mana Whenua, obviously, to understand exactly what they know and how we can work together on projects and enhance. But I don't know if we'll ever fully know everything ourselves.
I'll give the example of galaxids, which are something that I've understood or I've been reading about for quite a few years of my life. And if I looked back 20 years ago, they were really threatened, and there's only one site for them, and they'd just been found, and people have just been going out on Otago and finding them. Whereas I think our knowledge of them now is much, much better, partly because other people have told us about them. We've worked with communities and we've understood them better. But I'm not quite sure that we've proactively, until relatively recently times, gone out and protecting and maintaining that part. And sorry, I don't want to take us off skew, but, and I probably am. I'm not quite sure how much of the stuff we were doing beforehand that we should have been doing or could have been doing, and that is quite key in understanding going forward.
I think that there's an opportunity to direct what we should do through this strategy. So that's kind of why we're here for this workshop, is to understand what you as governors want us to deliver, and what you want us to understand so that we can make those informed.
I suppose that's understanding slightly in better layer what the regulatory statutory role is and what we have done to meet that statutory role. Have we really done everything we could have been doing and should have been doing? And then what does it look like going forward? And I'm sorry, I'm going backwards, but I don't understand what we should have been doing for the last 20 years.
I don't think, I think the NPSIB has helped to try and understand what we should be doing, and that role clarity hasn't always been clear because it's been interpreted in different ways across the country.
Okay,
So
it
we've
is
done
the
our
IB
best.
that's made the difference.
Pardon?
It's the IB, the NPSIB that's.
Yes,
made
it's given us more clarity around our regulatory role, and in the past that hasn't been clear. We've had the RMA to direct, which is quite high level. So the NPSIB gives more clarity around what a regulatory role should be, and that's obviously relatively new. So we've done our best in over the last 30 years in understanding what our role should be, and we've obviously increased investment, and we've done more work in the biodiversity and biosecurity space to support those goals and visions in the RMA, but it was up for interpretation, a lot of it.
Okay, sorry, I'm sort of going backwards, but I just didn't have that quite clean definition to.
Yeah, so I think this workshop and the development of the strategy will help guide us as staff to know where we should be undertaking work so that informed decisions can be made.
Who do we have? Councillor Ware, then Noon, and then Scott.
I was just following up on Alan's comment around land use change and that being largely habitat loss. And I was just, sorry, it's more of a comment, but I think it's an important point. I can add inflection at the end to, in case you guys want to answer it as a question. But just around land use change being habitat loss, I think it's also important that I assume we're also talking about like edge effects, and you're not just losing the biodiversity in the area that you're losing that direct habitat of, but there's flow-on effects from all these things that we're doing. Everything's super connected. I think it was just a recent paper in NZES about how there's varying levels of intensity of land use changes the way that the edge effects into the surrounding ecosystems apply and stuff like that. So I assume that's also covered in that land use change picture.
Dogs, visiting kids.
Yeah, all of that stuff.
Thanks, Edward. Definition of land use change, I'm not sure what it is, but on the basis that New Zealand's population has doubled since 1970, land use change has an urban sense and a rural sense. So I'm just making sure that when we talk about land use change, I think we just need to be careful how we discuss that out in the public arena. Yeah.
Yeah, and do both.
Councillor Scott, then
I found Kate's question quite an interesting one. Because when I look back in regards to biodiversity, to be honest, I found it a little bit frustrating. From a governance perspective, we now get very good reports, so we can get a feel through the reporting mechanism of how things are going. From a governance perspective, we have the opportunity to be involved in some of the projects that we've been focusing on over time, like Tomahawk and these types of things, but it's not necessarily a big breath from a governance perspective, the Otago catchment community. But what The question in my mind has always been our success and our role in pulling things together and integrating with these other entities and actually listening to some frank dialogue about how things are tracking. And I know years and years ago, Gretchen and I had the opportunity to attend a forum, and you do have biodiversity forums. And I just put that out there to Richard CE, some consideration, just because, reports are good, but, just to be able to attend something like that and observe for a period of time, and not necessarily the whole forum, but just to get a better feel of what's actually happening as opposed to, so transparency. I just encourage transparency. If we're to get there, and this, as Kate talks about this all the time, but, governance and staff and the community, we need to work together, and there needs to be no secrets. We need to have honest conversations and honest action. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point well made, Brian. We've got a hard finish at 11 because of the council meeting, and there's a section coming up on the way forward and a reference group. So good conversation around content and where we're going, but really important we get to that section. So if everyone's happy that Shay just skips to that now, so we can have that part of the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Great conversation. Obviously, lots to talk about here, and we've covered a lot of the why and the why now. And we're clearly at an opportune moment and a moment that we should be acting. So let's turn our gaze to strategy, what's involved. And so what's involved is that legislation and policy. There's some areas that we need to make some choices. And so we're just socializing those with you and the approach we intend to take. We're going to cover off bringing biosecurity into the biodiversity strategy, taking a months to see approach, the approach we intend to take with that collaborative space with those city and district councils and Mana Whenua from the forum, for example. And so I'll start off by handing over to Libby to get us cranking on biosecurity.
And I'll be quick because there's not much time. So our role is defined in the Biosecurity Act 1993, and this requires regional councils to provide leadership and activities that prevent, reduce or eliminate adverse effects from harmful organisms that are present in New Zealand in their region, and to manage pest species and lead biosecurity within our region. So we have a complementary role to that of MPI, where their role is to stop pests and diseases at the border before they get to New Zealand. And they lead the national system to eradicate or manage the impact of those already here. So there's a joint memorandum of understanding that's just been signed recently between Biosecurity New Zealand, DOC, and Te Urukahika. That was in August this year, which provides a collaborative framework for parties to work together on biosecurity matters. So we need to align our work to achieve outcomes. Pest species are a major cause of the decline in Indigenous biodiversity. To achieve biodiversity outcomes, it's important to address issues as early as possible to support biosecurity. So that is shown on the invasion curve on the slide there. So investing at the start when something first gets here is much more effective than once you've got an established large population to control. So there's currently 2 strategies that exist. We've got the Otago Biodiversity Strategy, which we've talked about, or Shay and Scott have talked about, and that has biodiversity as an outcome. We also have our ORC Biosecurity Strategy 2019. And that's biosecurity as a method or tool that helps us to achieve outcomes. And we also, alongside that, have our regional pest management plan. So the proposed change that Shay has just briefly touched on is that we merge the biosecurity strategy and the biodiversity strategy together. And this would provide clearer direction on how we use biosecurity work to achieve biodiversity outcomes. The regional pest management plan would still handle other biosecurity outcomes, such as economic outcomes, where they only relate to biosecurity. And we think this is a more cohesive approach. We can combine regulatory actions like biosecurity with non-regulatory work, such as our integrated catchment management work and catchment advisor work. It would also support further collaboration across the different ORC teams so that there's defined outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So the current biosecurity strategy, there's a big list of different approaches that have been populated into this document. And it lists lots of different actions and approaches we could take to support biosecurity, but it doesn't help us to prioritise this work by detailing which actions would get the best outcomes. So what we're looking for in a new biodiversity biosecurity strategy would be strategic decision making. So we want to understand the situation thoroughly so we can make strategic choices about which approaches we invest more in, and we can focus on and set clear priorities through the strategy. So the bigger impact and better value, and by tackling the most important issues in the most effective way, our resources can be used most effectively. That's my plug for combining.
Oh, thanks, Libby. We'll just keep rolling. So what the next scope approach is about a Kia Takitai approach, where we take into account biodiversity from the mountains to the sea, so bringing in the terrestrial, the freshwater, the coastal marine. And so the MPSIB directs us to do terrestrial, but gives us the option of doing the rest. And we think, as we discussed earlier, that's the best way to get a cohesive approach to it. You know, what happens in the mountains and on the hills affects what happens in the rivers and at sea, out to sea. Collaboration. So back to that point around the forum, and I think
Reference group?
one more slide away. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
DC made a couple of tweaks. That's
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yes, I apologise. Okay, this is
Sorry,
where I
sorry,
deviated. Yeah, just wanted to give some space for that conversation. So this is about the collaboration between the local authorities, DOC, and the regional council, and so we committed to doing an interagency strategy at the last action plan. And we've been talking to the other players in the region, and also talking to a lot of regional councils around the country. And the experience with interagency strategies, where there's people seeking signatories from many different agencies, was really that it could take more than 10 years to do that, and it could also lead to not everyone signing up. And in all cases that we talked to, that was the case, and probably didn't actually achieve some collaboration outcomes. So what we're suggesting is, based on that learning, that we do really deeply collaborate with these guys. They're really important to this space. They have a clear role, and they're investing already. You know, DOC has a whole lot of approaches that we could benefit from, for example, and the cities and districts are already doing a whole lot of great work. So had a chat with them at the forum, and they expressed a strong desire to collaborate, and actually to collaborate on action. So I think there's some good runway there for us to pursue that. But that looks more like an ORC strategy, where we're doing really strong collaboration, than a strategy with lots of signatories is thinking. Okay, and so sorry for changing the course of the slides. But any quick questions before we move on to? I just move on to the partnership and the reference group that we're asking for guidance and recommending. So what we're doing here is seeking to deliver on the goals set and the strategic directions around the partnership, and having that effective partnership with mana whenua to get really good outcomes for the region. So the revision of the biodiversity strategy is a great opportunity to have that effective and meaningful partnership. And you know, as we said, we've heard from mana whenua about the central importance of biodiversity to mana whenua. And I think it's fair to say mana whenua are an effective partner in the maintenance of biodiversity, demonstrating leadership and active work out there, entrepreneurship and action. You'll be familiar with the significant examples of this throughout Otago. So we've been working really closely with Ōkaha to understand how we ensure that we do achieve that. And there's some ways in which we can do that. We need to align the timing and when we're working together. So we'll be doing some really solid planning and working closely with them. But another way that we can align and achieve that meaningful partnership is through a reference group. And yeah, so we're proposing a reference group with councillor and mana whenua representation. And that the role would be guidance and direction for the OIC staff, Ōkaha and Te Ao Marama, who would be doing the mahi, doing the work. And that would be, we might check in regularly, maybe once a month. And we're thinking it would be quite similar to a reference group that we had for the climate strategic climate action plan throughout the development of the strategy. And the terms of reference for that might be similar, but with that mana whenua representation. Yeah, so wanted to create an opportunity for a discussion. I think the chair's thought we should do that.
Thank you for that. We have about 4 minutes. The principle of it, I think, is fine, and you're looking for a recommendation from the Environmental Science and Policy Committee to Council to adopt that. But is that something we can agree with here in terms of the reference group? Is that the key?
Can you just clarify that process for us, Shay, post this workshop, how it will then be formally established?
Yeah, so I think, so as you will have seen, we've broached this with Mana to Mana, seeking some advice, bring it to you here to seek your endorsement of that approach and to take it forward in a paper to council for a decision. Yeah, workshop today, so no decisions, but yeah.
Councillor Scott.
Sounds great.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm going to put up a slightly different idea, coming from the Catlins CAP project, which is all about biodiversity. And they're really wanting to go very shortly. They're about to do a public presentation in October. And I'm really worried that we're going to come to that edge and then not have anything to do. If you're going to do the fundamental principles of doing it mountain to the sea and doing it almost at a catchment scale anyway, I think getting everyone in the room over Otago to do this at that level will not necessarily give you the best outcomes. You will not have the right people necessarily in the room from DOC, for example. There'll be some being repetitive. My challenge to you is to be saying, the challenge I think I have is, what would it look like if we did it by FMU or by subcatchment? Because to my mind, A, Catlins is really going to be ready, and B, it would be a good test to see how that would roll out.
Oh, pass to Louis.
So that the purpose of this project, the strategy, is to have a regional approach to how we manage biodiversity and biosecurity. The catchment action plans already will do that through, so that at the FMU level, and but not just for biodiversity, for anything environmental. So it won't override anything that the catchment action plans are doing. It's to set a higher level. What are we looking to achieve for our region, not at a FMU level, but I guess that's for you all to decide.
Well, yeah, and I sort of get that. I'm just testing the idea, but the problem is we're going to come to October, we're not going to have anything almost to do at the Catlins or funded projects, and it's just, yeah.
So we're looking at that separate issue, and we've identified some opportunities to find something. I'm
Okay.
sure we can take the next steps. I think I think if we think about this, it's a strategy at a high level and then an action plan of which ICM at an FMU level will be a critical action that falls out of this biodiversity biosecurity
Well,
strategy.
yeah.
And then will enable the continued ICM program, and then under that is the investment this table will have to consider to support
And
the
that-
actions within those ICM plans.
And that's fine, it's just that the ICM didn't really have come up in there, which was disconnected, and so that's possibly where I'm coming from, is building that into that as part of that.
Sure, it certainly features strongly in the thinking already, very close to the ICM team, so it's a good note.
That's don't see it up there, sorry.
Councillor Cook.
Oh, thank you, Edith, thank you, Shay and Co, Rachel and Co. I think it's really awesome that we're getting to the stage where we are about to develop a strategy. I think it's an awesome idea that we need to have a reference group as you've discussed. And I think the process would be to bring a paper to the ESP committee with some background stuff as to how you'd see it developed. And I think at the end of the day, it's about it's creating our region-wide, our OIC overall strategy around biodiversity, biosecurity, and how they may interlink and intertwine, and then it'll feed back down from there as the strategy is developed. So I think it's really awesome. Thank you very much, and that's what I think should happen. Thank you.
Councillor Nicole, I think you've summed it all up. There's no dissension with that approach. I think there'll be a paper go to ESP, picking up on what has been discussed. So thank you very much for the workshop, taking us through the biodiversity strategy, the scope. Ngam hi atu kia koutou, tātou katoa. I think we need to now have a kia whakamutu, so you can go into your council. So tēnā rā koutou, unu here, tūru tapu nui, kia māma, kia wā te nākau tēnana me te wairu i te ara takatū, ko ia rā e rongo i whakairi ake, kei runga, a haumi e hui e, yeah, sure.
Thank you.